I was very fortunate to be able to meet Gemma for the first time face to face in Hobart, where we had a fascinating, short but very intense conversation on the nature of research and also on the project that she's been working on. She had, I think, about 4 minutes, 30 seconds with a dodgy microphone in Hobart. So I'm delighted to say that she has got at least quadruple that and hopefully a good microphone here to talk about the toxic curse of Little Miss Perfect. Gemma.
Hello, everyone. So my project is looking at toxic perfectionism and a fear of failure. So first thing I want to say is this is an entirely photoshopped picture. I think this is the Mandela effect. I truly thought that Little Miss Perfect existed. It isn't a thing. It's only Mr. Perfect. So I had to do a Photoshop of Little Miss Sunshine and Mr. Perfect to make this. So hopefully Roger Hargreaves isn't going to come knocking based on this. So I'm going to put a downer on the morning because I became very, very interested in a fear of failure and toxic perfectionism for two reasons. The first one being that I'm a toxic perfectionist and I have a definite fear of failure. I'm that overachiever who works and doesn't give up. To the detriment of mental health, etc. Then really sadly, it's because in the 5.5 years that I have been at my current school, we've lost 4 girls who have gone on and graduated and then experienced failure at university and unfortunately took their own lives. And so this is where my interest develops because I am of the opinion that we can't lose any more on the basis of a bad grade. So just for context here, failure is, I think everybody has this idea of failure of being, you get an E, or in the UK, you get that U. It's not necessarily like that. It's an individual's perception of failure and the experience that they go through. And I think all of you will be familiar with those girls because it is a phenomenon that is more linked to females, where they are teacher shopping. They're so desperate for that extra mark in their assignments. They're knocking at the door, they're at the tutorials because they are so scared of doing less than what they consider to be perfect. And so what we can talk about failure as is this learning process where students face this difficulty and they have to adjust or expand their approach to it in order to suit this new information that they're getting. And so when you look at the data regarding this, it's actually become a bit of a focus in terms of the OECD data. For those of you that are familiar with the PISA tests that occurred, what the 14-year-olds do. I will say that PISA is a bit of a nightmare. It was never designed to be a comparative study between countries, but then the US threatened to pull the funding and it became a comparative analysis. But aside of all of that, they will test literacy, numeracy, scientific literacy. And what they've started to do is look at psychological aspects of the teenagers. And the most recent one that occurred looks at fear of failure, because when you consider this fear of failure, it has ongoing knock-on effects for the rest of life. So you can you increase that anxiety, you have a higher level of suicidal ideation, you miss out on jobs. So I think most of us will be familiar with that idea of when women are applying for jobs, they will only apply for a job if they tick off 100% of every single dot point. Like, can I do everything? Whereas men don't. Men are like, whatever, we'll wing it. We'll be absolutely fine. And so the most recent PISA tests actually looked at that fear of failure. And in every single country, bar 3, girls have this higher fear of failure. And they were looking at that knock-on impact upon mental health, etc. So interestingly, the only 3 countries where boys, so there is actually no significant difference between the girls and the boys. The girls are still high, but there's no significant difference, was Montenegro, Panama, and Jordan. And I've tried to work out what the similarities are between those countries. And aside from a same color in their flag, who knows? So that could actually be a separate research investigation there. So when we look at this fear of failure, there's a number of reasons why girls in particular undergo this, and what is driving that is that fear of the shame. So what do the parents think? What do the friends think? They're always comparing themselves. I think when we work with girls, we see that it's you give them the grades back and immediately it's like, what did you get? Like, what was your grade? And that anxiety, which I think a lot of the presenters today have focused upon, in the light of COVID and the aftermath of that, you've got this heightened level of anxiety. And something like schoolwork and the assignments and assessments, etc., is probably something that they can control a little bit more. And one aspect of life where they can actually have a direct impact on it. And so they want that control. They want to actually be excellent at it in order to, I guess, prove to themselves and others of just how competent that they actually are. So the problems in girls' schools that we see, what I've just alluded to before, when girls make mistakes, they interpret it very differently to boys. So boys will just think, yeah, it's actually not anything to do with us. Whereas girls look at it from a more intrinsic place. They consider themselves to be flawed in some way. And so what the research is showing when you read the literature is that girls who have a fear of failure, they put themselves into two groups. So one of them are the overachievers, the toxic perfectionists, where they work. And then the others are the self-sabotagers. So they're the failure avoiders. And I think we're all familiar with these. So they're the ones which are like, oh, but I had rowing. Oh, but I was at my dad's house. Oh, but I couldn't do X, Y, Z. And so you've got these girls who they're knocking at your door, wanting that last bit of, or, you know, that, can you say that again so I can type it out? Like, because they're wanting the answers, they want to get that 100%. And then you've got those who are very, very capable, but at every point there's always an excuse. Oh, but I had that meeting. And what is interesting is that the overachievers, what the research is showing is that the overachievers, if they experience failure, then quite often there's this cyclic transition into those self-sabotagers. So it becomes this kind of like cyclic. And I think we have all experienced those where you have these high flyers for maybe a couple of years and they're exceptional, they're full marks and everything. And all of a sudden it starts to tail off, but there's always an excuse. There's always some reason for it, because it's easier to blame your rowing meet or the fact that you had netball or whatever it is, rather than the realization that actually you're just not as good as you used to be. The work level has increased and you're going to have to work even harder to maintain that. So what we have, Brene Brown, she calls it life paralysis. So they are afraid to put themselves out there because they're scared of what the repercussions might be, that somebody might see them as imperfect. And I think linking back to what Nikki was talking about with all the stuff to do with the social media, I think this is exacerbating it. So at all points they're given this curated version of life on social media, how to look, what they should do, where they should go. People just they put out the version of them, the best version of themselves. And just as a side note here, I spoke to Ian about this in Hobart. I think all of us are beating ourselves up regarding social media and the impacts that it is having. And we know that, we can see directly. We know that it's affecting the grey matter in the brain. We know that these kids are less likely to form emotional connections with people. The communication skills are messed up. Attention spans, going back to what Nikki was talking about, attention spans are well down because they're so used to, they've got their phone, they've got the laptop, they're watching the movie. They're not actually focusing directly on things. But we all beat ourselves up about how do we improve this. I think we also need to remember that we're fighting against a system where there are hugely intelligent individuals whose entire career is based around developing algorithms that get these kids sucked into doom scrolling. And how are we supposed to fight against that? So we do the tech-free time, we tell them to put their phones in the locker, etc. But if we have them for maybe 6-7 hours of the day, what is happening for those other 18 hours outside of school? And so we, as a collective in the education industry, we are fighting against people who make money off going against what we need for those children. So I always think that's very interesting whenever there's anything to do with social media of, yes, but how are we supposed to fight against those people? So I think you're probably familiar with all of these things. So the working in girls' schools, and this is definitely the signs that anybody is afraid of that failure. So in order to, why it actually matters, as I've said before, if we can move to a system where we celebrate and we learn from failure, then there is greater success to be given. So one of the most important things that I'd like my to remind my girls about is that when you get something wrong, the knowledge that you gain from that actually depreciates more slowly than knowledge that you gain from success. So this actually links really beautifully to what Cedric was talking about, because R is literally you're just in a constant state of failure because it really sucks and you've got to learn everything from anew. And so I really liked his presentation because these girls would have had no pre-context of R. They would have been dropped in that class and they would have seen that screen and they would have just all been in exactly the same situation. And I think it really must have leveled the playing field, and the fact that they were all learning together. So because that is something that is completely new. That is not that, you know, you start French together and some people went on holiday to France or whatever. It is something so unbelievably new that they had to learn together and they had to learn from it. And just looking at Cedric's quotes on his screen, celebrating that failure and understanding that there is a process to it really links quite beautifully to that. So my second part of this is actually linked to my research, or that my interest in that is action research, because another one of my bugbears is the fact that why is it in education that the experts in education never the ones that are gone to for their expertise? Like, why is that? Why is the expert in education always a politician? Why is it never the actual teacher who is at the coalface? So I think for a lot of us, we talk about stuff that we do in class, and we never actually call it action research. If you've ever had a conversation with a colleague going, oh, that really sucks. Like, how am I going to do it differently? Or if you've ever tweaked a lesson based on feedback, or you've ever listened to somebody and done something differently, then you've done some form of action research. So it's just a really fancy way of saying, I see something problematic in my class, my room, or my school, and I want to do something about it. But it has to be that evidence-based aspect to it. So when I decided to look at this fear of failure, I did the research. I had that interest in that problem. So I wanted to minimize girls just not taking a risk. I went and double checked the literature. So I did a big literature review on it, and I worked out how could I try and improve this. So I'm a very busy person, and I didn't want something which was going to take a huge amount of time, because I think looking at other people's kind of research here, maybe like Lauren and stuff like that, the time aspect that it was taken for some of the mentors, you want to do something which is going to be quick and it's easy and it's going to be easily implementable by other schools. And so I looked at something called failure pedagogy, which is a growing idea that you can essentially normalize failure. And it is something so laughably simple. It is a case of just reminding girls that failure exists and that you might once have failed, or WD-40 is called WD-40 because it failed 39 times. So it is just these small incidental things. So does it really matter? Like, yes, this grade might suck now, but what can we do based on that? And so there are a few different aspects of failure pedagogy. I'll talk through the ones that I focused on later. And then I'm all about data. So this is why I really appreciated Cedric's presentation. So I collected some pre-data, I did my intervention, and then I did post-data, and then I obviously did the analysis and then formed conclusions. So just from my aspect, just a bit of background about failure pedagogy, because it is quite broad. It's basically just getting them to accept and learn from failure. So again, just to remind you, it's not failure like, oh my gosh, you got an E and you're not on this course anymore. It's about getting things wrong in a learning process. And so you are essentially recognizing it as a learning experience, you're productively engaging with it, as it says on the slide, and you're hoping for better learning and reflection as an end product of it, so they can look back, where did they go wrong, what can they do differently, how can they proceed in the future. And so my kind of what I looked at it from was reframing it, rephrasing it, reflecting upon it, and then had this neat little slide, and I needed a fourth. So I was like, okay, record it. So just the neating it up. So with reframe it, I love this saying here. So children have never been very good at listening to their elders, but they never fail to imitate them. So just reminding the girls of all the times in my life where things have gone wrong, and actually acknowledging myself that I am that toxic perfectionist. I am that like awful overachiever, and we don't have to be like that. And then the rephrasing it was very much about looking at the progress. So it was it was assessment pieces that weren't actually ever going to go towards a final grade, but we could unpack them, we could have a look at what went wrong, and then utilize that knowledge for the final assessment piece. And I will say I did this with the year 10 classes, because 8R classes, the timing is just terrible in terms of trying to fit the content in. So it was done with I only teach 10 to 12, so it's done with my year 10s. And then reflection as well. So giving back assessments, it very much became, I'd take them out separately, one by one, and go through assessment pieces and like, what happened? You unpack this piece, not me telling you where I think things went wrong. Like, have a look at your grade, have a look at my feedback, and reflect upon what you could do differently in the future. So providing them with an opportunity to realize that failure does not just have to be this, here's your assessment piece back, this final is done. And then I obviously needed recording because I think with action research, and I think what I was trying to say to Nikki is, quite often we use these anecdotal ideas of, hey, I tried this and it worked really well, but we never formalize it. And this is what I think we really should get to with teaching. We are all university educated. A number of us have master's degrees, PhDs. We are all well acquainted with working at that higher level, but we never actually put it out there. And so when you have a look at a lot of the education research that comes out, they're not actually teachers. There might be people who were a teacher for 3 months back in the past, and then they've moved over into that research aspects, but they've been so much out of education for such a long time that I think it becomes very difficult to try and engage with people where they are, from my perspective, just trying to make money out of making teachers feel bad about them supposedly being a problem, if that makes sense. So I call them the edu gurus. So they're largely guys who they tend to republish books every so often when their bank account is becoming a little low. So I was using something called Conroy's Performance Failure Appraisal Inventory. So I will say that there is a problem with the Likert scale, so 5-point Likert scale, because quite often people will just put the middle one. But the way that this has been designed is it's got flipped questions. So it's not just a case of clicking 3 all the way down. They've got to engage with the question. And so further down, there'll be something very similar, but it will be flipped around. And so afterwards, you get this, you can see on the right-hand side, the scores on the Likert scale are from -2 to +2. And essentially, you put it through, it becomes a sum at the end of it. So you add up the questions, which are linked to the different areas of fear of failure. So which are on the left-hand side. So experience like shame, embarrassment, devaluing one's self-estimate, etc. And then it basically gives the participants a score for each aspect of that fear of failure. So here were my results. So essentially, let me just move the screen. So essentially, from the pre to the post, my interventions produced a significant post-test improvement in the general fear of failure. So that was overall. So which is the end set of bars here. The normative data that I used here was taken from Conroy. So that was the guy who designed it. And so I will say there's probably issues with that as well, because it was based on college students, but it was the best normative stuff that I had available. And so then you can see the year 10 pre and the post test. So in particular, so overall there was a significance. And the particular interventions the particular aspects of failure that were significantly improved was the upsetting important others and the fear of important others losing interest. Now, that again would need some further exploration, because I think potentially being in front of me and me trying to normalize it, they're going, okay, actually she's an important person, she's somebody who is not losing interest in us because we're doing badly. There were no significant changes in the other dimensions of failure, but as there was an overall improvement, that it could be deemed as significant, but my class was also very small. So this needs to be done on a much, much larger scale. But as you can see here, when you look at your pre-test and your post-test, you can see that there has been a decrease. So this is essentially the negative part of it. So this is that they've got this really great fear of failure up here. So this would be the normative. And then you can see that pre-intervention, these were my goals. So that was huge. And then it decreased, but not as much as that normative data. And then here, this was probably quite interesting, actually, in terms of the normative from the college students. It was nothing about their self-estimate. It was nothing about them thinking that they were kind of great and really good at it. But my girls, they obviously had a much higher, but that then improved. Similar, them being scared of failure because they don't know what they're going to do in the future. Normative was not really an issue at all, but my girls were higher and then that decreased. And then here, this was also interesting. So pretty much matched the fear of important others losing interest. So this would be, your parents, your teachers, basically not taking any interest in you if you're doing badly. And that actually kind of then got better. So essentially you want to be further down here. You want to be the lowest that you can. And then that general fear of failure, this was the bit that I was kind of most excited about. So you give a score for each one of these separate sections. And then right at the end, there's this general one, which is obviously an additional form of all of these. And that was that improvement. This was also really interesting as well. So the fear of upsetting others for the normative was huge. My girls just didn't care to start with. And then that was significantly, was it significant? Yeah, significantly improved later on. So some particular interesting findings. 100% of the girls had avoided doing something because they were afraid that they would not do well. A lot of them felt that they were worried that if they're doing badly or they get something wrong, that people might think that they're not trying. Many of them, so 57% of them, I'll give you some quotes in a minute, but they use procrastination as an excuse for failure. So there's no real thing. Like for me, procrastination isn't necessarily a thing. It's like if you're just using it as an excuse because it's, and I think a lot of you will have girls which are like, I'm such a procrastinator. No, it's because you're so scared to open your laptop or open that book and take a look at what's in front of you. And it's a horrible feeling to look at it and be overwhelmed by, actually, I don't understand it, or there's too much to it, or this is going to be a really tough slog. And so it's easier to go, such a procrastinator. So there's some interesting psychology behind that. And then what was really sad was that nearly 36% of them thought that when they were doing badly, the entire intrinsic value started to decrease. So that was pretty sad for me to have a look at. And so then, let me just move my screen. I got some like beautiful kind of sound bites here. So these are from year 10 girls. And this one here, like it's really become this kind of keynote quote for me. So I feel as though this was about how that she felt about failure. I feel like it's an important and necessary step towards improvement and more advanced learning. However, I still find myself trying to avoid it or feeling ashamed or embarrassed when it happens to me. People of authority tell us that failure is important, yet we are often punished for it, and those who succeed gain their praise and recognition. And that was just like, that really spoke to me, because I think education as a system is, or that education reward system influences girls to be more motivated to avoid failure than create a desire to pursue success. Almost, it's like, can you just keep under the radar enough that you're just doing enough to succeed? So some others, desperate to avoid it at all costs, failure is bittersweet, embarrassed, don't know what to do. And then this is also interesting from, we do have issues with girls. They can be the most lovely, like I'm so excited to work with them, but when it comes to assessment, some of them do turn into monsters. And so this was really interesting as well, because for me, this quote down here, so it was, what do you tell your friends if you get a lower or low mark on an assessment? And this girl openly admitted she'll say that the marking was done unfairly, even if it wasn't. So you then having this kickback to teachers as well, in terms of then having to navigate girls spreading that the rumor mill is churning. Well, actually, I knew my stuff. She just didn't mark it correctly or whatever. So with this, I then had some emergent themes as well. So this was, there's definitely a lot more work that could be done with this. And I not only did the pre and the post, which was based on PF AI, but I also, similar to other people, had done some open-ended questions, which gave opportunity for them to expand and give those quotes. But then I did some follow-up interviews as well. And so I asked girls to volunteer to come in and have a chat with me. And some of them, and this was without any prompting whatsoever, these were two big emergent themes that came out just through chatting to them. So one of them was about that gender stereotype and saying that they were so scared of doing badly because it was parental expectations, and then them doing a comparison between them and their brother. And this is a quote from a boarder. So she comes from, she's a pig farmer from out in Dalby. And she said, it's the pressure. It's so stereotypical and not necessarily true. But I feel like it's okay for boys to go and become a tradie, but it looks stupid for us to go and like be a hairdresser. Almost it looks like failure. If a mum went to go and be a trader, it's like, good on you, that's a reasonable job. But for a girl, they had this very, very different expectation. And what we have a lot of actually in my school is that the girls, the sisters, have been sent to private school, and yet the boys are still going to the local state school. And so the girls are very, very aware of the fact that parents are giving up the money, they're investing in their daughters. For some of them, they are being sent to boarding school as well, which obviously then doubles the fees. And it's that pressure of, okay, well, mum and dad, they believe in me and I have to be better than my brother. And then second of all, this was actually a girl who, after the interview, she hung back and she said, oh, can I have a quick word with you? I said, yeah, no problem. And she said, have you thought about that cultural difference? And she said, because my failure is different to others, because even an A for me is an Asian fail. And when you look at the literature as well, you have the Asian failure and you also have the Black failure as well. So they're typically more in America, but you've got that smart Black student aspects as well. So this was beyond the theme because that was towards the end of my analysis, just looking at that fear of failure. But it's something that could be looked at as well. So what I really want to talk about is completing your own action research and formalizing stuff, because you can get the graphs out of it. You can get those quotes. You can have a look at, has your intervention had an impact? So for Nikki, that would be perfect. Like it's that short project that is done, and I think easily picked up by other year groups within or that actual same school or different schools altogether. So this then links to, I think it was Cedric talking about the data, and you had that cyclic motion, which is essentially this. So you spot a problem, you go and do something about it, and then you've got to go and evaluate it. So, and it goes wrong all the time because halfway through you realize that this is not working. So you just readjust, you just change those scales. And so as you then find out new things, nothing's ever conclusive or absolute, and everything's always ongoing. And so some ideas that I thought about here, like huge possibilities, because it doesn't have to be massive. It does not have to be you revolutionizing the entire education system of Queensland. It can be as simple as, have you had a positive impact on those 15 kids in front of you? And taking that concrete data that you have, can that then be expanded and utilized in different ways by different year groups, different classes, or at a much larger scale? But that's only going to happen if there is some way of ensuring that it is published and that people have access to it. And I think we just need to claw back a little bit of our professional, I guess, expertise, because I think for so long, teachers have really been bashed, and we know our kids best, and we are actually incredibly intelligent people, and we have this extraordinary wealth of expertise and knowledge, and often we don't do anything with it other than chat in the staff room. And I think we can do a lot more and put it out there in a public platform and see what other people can do with it. And that is it. Thank you very much.
Gemma, thank you so much. Lots of nodding and lots of applause throughout that. And I, for one, was delighted to be able to hear you at full length, and also to add to the number of countries that Helen was referring to earlier, because you come from Wales. Right. Now, I'm conscious that I'm between you and lunch in Cleveland, but I promise you that the next 15 minutes will be something that you will, I think, value and treasure. My closing will be about 2 minutes. So I'm just going to kick straight across. Gemma, thank you so much. And I know there will be further comments and questions that will come from that. Also, it picks up a theme from the perfectionism study that we had in the first cohort, which is written up in The Magic in the Space Between. I won't dwell on that now because quite apart from anything else, I think one or two of us have got slide transition envy.